Welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at UNC Pembroke. Comic books have been called America's mythology, and science fiction has a long history of examining contemporary issues under the guise of futuristic fantasy. My guest today is Hector Miray, author of Faith and Fandom. In the book, Hector examines superheroes, sci-fi, and video games, and presents their lessons in biblical terms. Hector, what inspired you to write the book?
I've been working in ministry, pastoral staff, and things of that nature for 9-10 years, and pretty much it's my mental mindset that anytime I see something, I automatically draw biblical parallels to it, but quite often I don't have an opportunity to have an outlet to do that, because if I stood up in front of a congregation and tried to tell them about science fiction or comic books, I'd be looked at, awkwardly. Even though most of what I work with is college students, even that's a stretch for some of them. So overall, this is kind of what goes on in my mind on a daily basis whenever I'm watching anything, and just really wanted the chance to put it to paper, to put it out there in a means that it would be useful to someone or that someone would enjoy it.
Well, I think it's interesting because you're looking at basically what's contemporary entertainment, and you're trying to find a lesson that the audience can pull from it, at least to examine their own conscience, so to speak. And I thought that it was interesting. I'm not exactly the most religious of fellows, but I found the book to be thought-provoking, and I recommend anyone who has an interest to please look it up on Amazon and get a copy for themselves. Now, how much research did you have to conduct? Now, I know for myself, I've been reading comics since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, so I've got a pretty big library, but did you have to go through a lot of research to find specific examples of comics or of video games or films? Did you have any help?
On the research end, no, not really. I read comics on a very regular basis, and my family kind of cycles through episodes of Doctor Who and things of that nature, and pretty much I'd made note of these things in advance. There was one illustration I wanted to use involving Red Hood, Jason Todd, and for the life of me, I couldn't find it. And I literally sat down with like 6 long boxes of comics and went through every possible thing that it was, and I never found it, so I didn't use it. But overall, most of this was just the information that I already had available. And in regards to like quotes and things, I would watch specific episodes of things to really pull from it and make sure I wasn't thinking of it incorrectly, that I wasn't pulling it even out of context in regards to that. But overall, it's just kind of in my wheelhouse to have those things on the top of my mind to begin with.
Mm-hmm. And since the book has come out, has anyone come up to you and said, I was watching an episode of my favorite show last night, and there was something that, now that I've read your book, I start to put these connections together myself. Have you?
Yeah, there's a girl that I met at Heroes Con last summer that's kind of been following the progress, because I started the progress of this last summer, and just in announcing it and then slowly working towards it. And she read the book last week, and she already started sending me emails of saying, ooh, Thor, the bridge to Asgard is like prayer. It's the one thing that connects this world to that one. And other people have sent me things. When I was writing the Doctor Who chapter, I was putting up memes or pictures with the text and everything of kind of summarizing each chapter. And I put up one saying there was going to be a Doctor Who chapter, and someone said, ooh, you really need to do this. And I ended up using it, so credit to that. But overall, people have been responding really well and just making the connection with it, or things that they didn't see before. We actually we showed Man of Steel in our campus ministry and had a roundtable discussion about those concepts as well.
Well, it's funny. I think we're going to talk about Man of Steel in a little while. But if people wanted to learn more, do you have a website or a Facebook page for the book?
Facebook page is facebook.com/faith and fandom, spelled out and as well as there's Pinterest for it, because I don't use Pinterest often, but there's enough graphics that are involved with it that it just goes along. As well, it's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and places like that that are keeping it updated as well.
And have you been getting a lot of followers on Facebook?
In the last month, I think I've gained about 250.
That's fantastic.
I put a push out there just to say that I actually went to Second and Charles bookstore, and they told me that my book would be carried based on how many Facebook likes I had.
Really?
And so, you know, I just put it out there one time, and it jumped from like 120 to, I think right now it's at 380. And so that was just a jump for that. But it's getting a good response, and out of the like 380, only 200 of those are my friends. So it's reaching other people. And then I really think the bigger point where it's actually going to make an impact is going to be this summer. I'm going to be at Apocalypse Comics for their free comic book day, having that as a table, and then Heroes Con. I have a table set up there, and I really feel like that's going to be where I make more of a connection in those capacities.
And Heroes Con, that's in Charlotte?
It's in Charlotte. Okay. It's June 20th through the 22nd.
Okay, well, we hope to bring our cameras down, so hopefully we'll see you there.
Okay, I love Heroes Con.
I've never been. I went to the NC Comic Con in
Raleigh.
In Raleigh this past November, and that was quite an experience.
I had a family obligation, otherwise I'd planned to attend, but Heroes Con's always just a really good experience.
Well, I look forward to going. Now, you were talking about Superman, the Man of Steel. Now, in Faith and Fandom, you compare the last son of Krypton to Jesus. Can you expand on this?
Just some very basic kind of archetype ideas of it, that he came from somewhere else, somewhere, you know, extraterrestrial, so to speak, that, you know, if Christ came from heaven, Superman came from Krypton to our world, that he, you know, I'm not saying Superman was perfect, but in the comparison that he is slightly supposed to be more elevated in his stature than man is, that he came here with a purpose, that especially with the whole doomsday death of Superman thing, that he died resurrected, and that he died saving the world. You know, I wasn't exactly a huge fan of the whole way the death of Superman went, and, you know, the double punch kill with that or anything, but those comparisons have just been drawn, and I think he's probably the most compared to biblically culture hero out there, that he's the easiest or the most topical one that people draw to. And so some of it was just easy right off the bat stuff, but then Man of Steel really, you know, really tried hard. And you know, I read an interview with Zack Snyder saying they really wanted to play that aspect of it up, and so especially with Man of Steel, it was very there.
Well, you know, it's funny when we talk about the Man of Steel. I was not fond of that movie. I, you know, enjoyed the work of you know, Kurt Swan, the pre-crisis Superman.
Right.
We're talking very nerdy now.
Yeah.
And I was a big fan of the whole run of leading up to the death of Superman. Dan Jurgens is one of my favorite storytellers. And the one thing that I would say about Superman is that it wasn't until recently that we started to see this Superman-Jesus comparison. I think goes back to an Alex Ross painting from the oversized books they did with Paul Dini a few years back. But then in Superman Returns, there was the whole allegory of him falling back to Earth, arms outstretched, and in Man of Steel, I mean, they were hammering that home when you have
they really were.
Jor-El constantly talking about you're here to save the world. And that doesn't really relate, in my mind, to the comics, which were the two creators, Siegel and Schuster, you know, city Jewish kids who were probably telling more of an immigrant's tale coming to the new world rather than a religious allegory. But I mean, I think what you've written is certainly in keeping with what we're seeing now.
What we're seeing now, yeah. And even I know that it's a lot more present now, but even when I was like in middle school and high school, especially after Death of Superman, there were a couple books published just on that. I remember our church's youth group library had a Superman in the Bible book, and it was, you know, even that was like right after the death of Superman. One of the things that really, I think, at least in literature lately, outside of Man of Steel, Brad Meltzer wrote a book, just a fictional novel called Book of Lies, maybe 5 years ago, and it actually was about the murder of Siegel's father, and in that capacity, and in that they tied a lot of biblical things, like the actual dust jacket of the book says, Cain killed Abel with a rock, Siegel's father was shot with a gun. Both of the weapons have never been found, and now they tie together. And I mean, they tried a very literary comparison of them, but you know, in Meltzer's book, he even pointed out that because his father was killed at such a young age, that was his premise for making Superman, to have someone who couldn't be
Right.
stopped by bullets, and they just really drew it out there. But it's something that I can definitely see has been a lot more present, but in true Superman form, going back, it doesn't equal up, comparatively speaking, to where we are now.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting. I mean, again, I guess this goes with any long-standing character in fiction. You can see them getting adapted to the time. I mean, Sherlock Holmes was from the Victorian era, and yet a lot of the great Sherlock Holmes films are set in World War II, which was obviously well after the Victorian era. So as long as you're able to adapt and contemporize characters, it gives them a life that continues on and on. Now, in the book, you talk about the Justice League and the Avengers, and they're very successful comics, and in the case of the Avengers, one of the most successful films of all time. So
Right.
How does this community role reflect the role of community as written in the Bible?
One of the biggest problems, just in church culture, personally, in my opinion, around the world, is that it's become more about an institution, less about community, and that if you actually delve into the Bible, look into the teachings of Jesus, or even prior to Christ in the Old Testament, that community is one of the biggest aspects of it, that the term church is used 114 times in the New Testament, and none of those refer to a physical building. It's used as about the body, the gathering of people in community. And I think that if we are living in community, working together, then we're actually accomplishing more, that we're doing more when we can work together with others. And I just really saw that present when you have, group books like Justice League or Avengers, where, one task is too big, and so it takes more than one hero. I mean, even in Jeff Loeb's Superman Batman run, just that, the fact that they kept bouncing back between Superman and Batman, of how necessary it was to have one versus the other, that, Superman would just happen to get shot with a kryptonite bullet right beside Batman, and Batman would have to carry him on. And I think that if the role of the church is to care for others, to love, to be in support of the world around us and reach them in that capacity, if it's just one institution flying solo, trying it alone, you're going to waste your time and wither and die. But if we can work more in community, then like you see with Avengers and Justice League and those capacities, that we can actually do more good, and we can work together if we can let differences aside. I mean, if you can look back to Guy Gardner on Justice League, if you don't know who Guy Gardner is, he's a very disagreeable person.
He was kind of like a Rambo character, but he was boneheaded.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel like that's how a lot of American church is right now. I feel like the American church could pretty much be Guy Gardner, and if we could actually learn to work together and function in community, we could do a lot better. Mm-hmm. And but also, it's good to know that you have support, that have people that care, and that's honestly why I still pick up Justice League books, even when I'm not a fan of the current writer or the current artist, just because I just appreciate seeing how they relate to each other.
It's interesting because I would imagine if you are a small group of people and you are living somewhere, you have the choice of either living on your own or trying to work together to make everyone's situation better. And with a team book, like you were saying, you have some villain who's just too big for one hero to handle. But it is interesting how you can draw that comparison that, if your town needs electricity, it's probably better if everyone works to build a generator than if it is everyone goes and tries to
It's like
buy
the
batteries.
motto of Lost, live together, die alone.
Mm-hmm.
That was the big thing that they kept quoting throughout all the seasons of the show Lost, is that idea, and I think that really hammers it in.
Another theme that we see in team books, especially ones like the Fantastic Four, is that you have this family mentality, where it's, obviously in the Fantastic Four, obviously to us, the characters are related intimately, whether they're married or brother and sister or lifelong friends.
Right.
And we see that sort of family connection in our real lives. And have you seen anything that you would have perhaps written about?
I know that personally, at least in my life, that I didn't have a very good family setting, and so that I drew a lot of my family relation from the church and from having that community aspect. And I mean, if you go to the Bat family, so to speak. I mean, you've got the world's grumpiest loner in Batman, but he has a literal whole network of people that he calls family, from Dick Grayson to Jason Todd to Damian to Barbara Gordon to Stephanie, whoever the Batgirl that died, I forgot her name. But I think in that aspect that in the faith community as well as the just the world at large, that we lose our physical families at some point in time, or if we ever had them to begin with, and that that family and that community aspect really can be found through a faith community, but you see it really present in comics, just in that. And Batman's my favorite comic book character, and that's always something I feel like I like seeing the relationship with his family more than just him alone. It's like Tim Drake said, Batman needs a Robin, and just in that capacity, I feel like we need that kind of family unit to survive and to grow.
Now, we were talking about Superman before, and Superman is traditionally the character always tries to do the right thing. He's always there to save the day, and he's never one to really kind of take the glory. He's just there to make sure that things work out, whether it's the volcano exploding or he saves the village, or whether it's Lex Luthor with another death ray or something like that. Now, that's traditionally how he's been written, but in the Man of Steel film, which, spoiler alert, I didn't like, the film, as we said, is sort of forcing this Superman as a Jesus allegory, and yet at the end of the film, Superman does what is completely off canon for the character. He murders a villain. Sorry, folks. He murders a villain. Which is something that Superman would not do in the comics. I know that it's based on a comic from the 80s, but that was something that was done in an alternate dimension, and there was no choice, that sort of thing. So what are your thoughts on Superman as a killer and Jesus at the same time?
I think that, I don't know this, but my take on it, and I didn't write about this just because I didn't want to go there with this, I know that it's a whole Bible book about faith and comic culture, but I didn't want to pour it on way too thick. But I really feel like in that capacity, they were separating Superman as a killer of humans versus Zod. I think that if it had been Superman killing an innocent bystander or a human, that would have been, I really feel like they were going with Zod being the whole antithesis of Superman, and that if Superman is the Christ figure, then Zod would have been the Satan figure. And that if you go super biblical with it and go to like the book of Revelation, at the end of it, Satan's head is crushed and he's tossed into a lake of fire. So I really feel like if they were trying that hard to make Jesus look like the Messiah figure, then they would also, I felt like they were trying to do the end times Revelation version of it too, where he not only dies for the people or he saves the people, that he actually destroys the source of evil in that. I wasn't a fan of it. I liked the movie just because I was so disappointed with Superman Returns. I was so disappointed in that he didn't throw a single punch the entire film.
Well, you don't need that in an action film.
No, not at all. You don't need anybody hitting anything or stuff blowing up. But then on the flip side, to paint Superman as such a Messiah figure in that film and then have him literally destroy destroy the majority of Metropolis in just chaos. At one point, I'm just screaming at the screen, why don't you take this out of town? Take this to a desert. Take this somewhere else. It's in the Dragon Ball Z move. If there's a powerful villain, you fly away somewhere else. And it felt like we're building up this character to be this messianic figure to represent Christ. Oh, we hit the 2-hour mark. All right, break jump for a half hour. And I really felt like they did that. But also, I feel like they had him kill Zod just because they were trying to pull the whole Joss Whedon archetype of if you don't kill somebody, there's never a lesson learned. And because how are you going to contain Zod? Phantom Zone's gone. What else are you going to do? And that Zod even said, either you die or I die. And I really feel like that's just where they went with it.
Well, I'm of course, I would have gone the Adam West Batman route and hoped that he could have been rehabilitated in a prison. But I'm a wide-eyed optimist.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do recall sitting in the movie theater and actually thinking at a couple of different junctures, I'm going to get up and leave. But then I thought, well, I paid my money. I'm going to sit through this train wreck. Now, we're going to change gears a little bit. Let's talk about Doctor Who, a character who's been around for about 50 years or
50
so.
years now, yeah.
They're on what doctor number?
They are technically on doctor number 13.
Doctor number 13?
He's 12, but he's actually the 13th.
So what's your take on the character?
I enjoy the character. I feel like, honestly, he's a modern fairy tale in the capacity of, if you boil it down to the simplest statement of he's a magical man in a box that travels through space and time and saves the world. That's something relatable. And I know that when they originally made it, they also wanted it to be very historical. It was originally penned as a kids show. There was a movie made about the creation of it that just came out this year called An Adventure in Space and Time. That was actually about the whole process of how it came to be, and they wanted it to be an educational children's show, but also be sci-fi. Like, they originally planned for him every episode to go to a different historical place. Kids could learn something, run away from a monster, end of story. Kind of like Sherman and Mr. Peabody, but, British. But I really enjoy it. I enjoy seeing just how he impacts the world, just the fun of it, the fact that even though the actors change, that it's still supposed to be the same person. And I like that it's something my family can watch together. I've got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they both request to watch Doctor Who as a family, and I enjoy that of it. Yeah.
It's interesting too because it's from a different perspective than the American perspective. It's a British show with a very British hero and very British situations, and it's interesting to me. When I was in the 3rd grade, I remember the doctor who had the long scarf. Yeah. Those episodes were just coming on to public broadcasting, and there were a number of us in school who would watch those shows, and I remember one of my good friends would walk around with the long Doctor Who scarf.
That scarf is like 8 feet long.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
So for a kid, he just kept stepping on it all the time. It was kind of fun. But now to see a whole new generation of people looking at the Doctor, and with different actors playing the role, you've had older doctors, you've had younger doctors, and it's kind of interesting to see. I think they've got a new doctor now who's a little bit older, but the previous one was sort of a heartthrob.
I think the 10, the one 2 ahead, he was the heartthrob. He was the sexy guy. The last one had a really awkward shaped head. Just my wife couldn't get into it at first because she just kept looking at it saying his head's weird. But he was the youngest one to play the Doctor. So they went from the heartthrob to the youngest one, who he was the most childish, I think, in a good way. It really felt like you were watching, a fairy tale or something of that capacity. And then this guy, Peter Capaldi's the guy that just recently cast, and he is older, and he's also known for being really abrasive as a character actor, and he's supposed to be more dangerous and edgy than. I was
actually about to say that the previous Doctors were always very optimistic, and you always felt that there was, even though the situation might be dire, that it's not as bad as you think.
Yeah.
It seems like they're maybe going in the opposite direction to be a little bit more real world.
I think so. I mean, one of the things, when they revealed his costume, there hasn't been much shown, but when they revealed his costume, they said 100% rebel Time Lord, and that he's just supposed to be this new hardcore kind of guy, which it'll have its place. And it's the same thing you see in comics, in that, you'll get lighthearted, get too family-centered, then you'll tear a character apart, bring them down. It's like they went from a Batman Hush to where everything was well-organized machine of all the family. Then they had War Games, destroyed the whole family, spent 8 years building them back up, and then they just had a death of a family, in Batman again, tear it back down. Right. So I think that's what's going to happen. We had the heartthrob, the warm, fuzzy, child-friendly character, and honestly, it's under his watch that more people actually started watching Doctor Who, and they gave it credit to Matt Smith, the 11th Doctor, for that, but honestly, I feel that it was just, Matt Smith may have been the Doctor then, but I honestly give credit to Netflix, because you had all of David Tennant's adventures on Netflix by the time Matt Smith rolled around, so people caught up and ran with it. And everybody I know that has started watching Doctor Who in the last 5 years or so attributes it to Netflix.
Well, Netflix, it's interesting because I'm sure you remember as a kid, you would watch TV and it would be, Thursday night at 8 o'clock was The Cosby Show. Yep. You couldn't watch it on Monday night, but now with Netflix, you can watch whenever you want. We're able to control the program, the content, and everything. So it's an interesting dynamic as we move towards a non-scheduled world of TV. But speaking of TV, what a terrible segue. There was a TV show called Firefly and a film called Serenity.
Right.
And you write about that in your book. I'm not too familiar with it. I know it's on Netflix. It's in my instant queue. I keep meaning to watch it, but there's usually some wrestling documentary that comes on. So what is it about Firefly that speaks to you, and what lessons do you get from it?
Firefly was a doomed Fox TV show. Fox had hired Joss Whedon to really piggyback off the success of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and that's pretty much what they told him. They said, we want our own version of Buffy, because Buffy was on another network, and instead of giving them bubblegum, he gave them a meaty drama. And after they filmed the pilot I think cost $8 million to film the pilot. Wow. They scrapped it. They said, no, we need something more viewer friendly. And but it's just this heartfelt drama, but a lot of action comedy as well, about Earth is dead and gone, and it's basically pioneer times in space. Mm-hmm. And so you've got this ragtag group of people on a spaceship. You've got a captain who lost the war. You've got a prostitute who, in their culture, prostitutes are elegant members of society. They're like government officials. Mm-hmm. You've got a mercenary.
It's accurate.
Yeah. You've got a mercenary. You've got a pastor who's not left the missionary settlement for years. You've got a 19-year-old mechanic, and then you've got a girl who is the world's most dangerous government asset who's escaped. Mm-hmm. And it's just the dynamics of everything playing off of that. And one of the things that you see is that when the pastor is losing faith, the prostitute's the one who encourages him and prays with him. Mm-hmm. You've got that. You've got mercenaries that are learning how to actually involve themselves in family. There's one particular character named Jane that he's waiting every moment to betray his friends, and to the point where he realizes they really are his family and just mm-hmm. runs with it.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm getting the wrap-up sign, which means our 28 minutes has just flown by.
Oh, wow.
I do want to thank you so much for coming by, and I do want to recommend that everyone pick up a copy of Faith and Fandom. It's on Amazon right now. You've been watching Comic Culture. We've been speaking with Hector Miray, and we hope to see you next time on another episode of Comic Culture.